All right, folks, welcome to the Gritty Podcast. I am your host, Brian Call, and I am joined by my brother, the Gritty Broman. How are you, Brent?
I'm well, thank you.
Today's podcast is with a very dear friend of mine, kind of like a secondary father figure for me, and someone who had a profound influence throughout my life and still does. This person said to me once years ago, you find yourself longer in the tooth, get a little older, and you look back and you see, if you look back carefully, all these turns and changes throughout your life, things that came your way that rerouted you into a different direction. And if you look carefully, you'll see the hand of providence in all that you've done and where you are today. And I think that's very true. And so this man's name is Arnie Chupp, and he has been a mentor to me my whole married life, essentially. And we go deep on this podcast about life and meaning. I just interviewed Arnie based on things that I've gleaned from him that have kind of set me on a different path in life than maybe where I was headed before, or just brought things to light that I didn't know. I consider Arnie a wise human being that can add value to everyone, and he's really good one-on-one with young people, especially men, and he's really mentored a lot along the way. We talk about a lot of different things on this podcast that I think are meaningful, and that's really the best conversations to have. And we talk a lot about meaning itself and what does meaning mean. And for those of you getting ready to turn the dial because you don't want to talk about meaning, I think that the world is starving for that kind of conversation today, and it's not happening enough. And we talk about that a little bit. And I think that this is an excellent discussion that everyone should listen to. Everyone should tune into, because I don't know, this man has profoundly changed my life. Aim up. Pay attention. Fix what you can fix. Don't be arrogant in your knowledge. Strive for humility, because totalitarian pride manifests itself in intolerance, oppression, torture, and death. Become aware of your own insufficiency, your cowardice, malevolence, resentment, and hatred. Consider the murderousness of your own spirit before you dare accuse others, and before you attempt to repair the fabric of the world. Maybe it's not the world that's at fault. Maybe it's you. You failed to make the mark. You've missed the target. You've fallen short of the glory of God. You've sinned. And all of that is your contribution to the insufficiency and evil of the world. And above all, don't lie. Don't lie about anything, ever. Lying leads to hell. It was the great and the small lies of the Nazi and communist states that produced the deaths of millions of people. Consider then that the alleviation of unnecessary pain and suffering is good. Make that an axiom. To the best of my ability, I will act in a manner that leads to the alleviation of unnecessary pain and suffering. Meaning is the way, the path of life more abundant, the place where you live when you are guided by love and speaking truth, and when nothing you want or could possibly want takes any precedence over precisely that. Do what is meaningful, not what is easy. These are excerpts from the book 12 Rules for Life by Jordan Peterson. And Arnie and I touch on that a little bit as well in this podcast. We talk about meaning, like I said, and I think that when you're living life the way that, like he describes, where you're doing your best to alleviate all the suffering in the world, meaning is something that is really very few people actually talk about, because like we discuss in this podcast, Arnie and I, if you talk about meaning, then you got to talk about all the things that come with it, which is responsibility, a little bit of faith or belief. What comes with it is judgment. And people don't like judgment unless it's, condemning you for climate change. So it's like, but as far as morality goes, there's sinning against the planet's one thing, but there's no such thing as, sinning in general. It's a very interesting world we live in today where, like I said, I just feel like this conversation isn't happening that often or enough. So we have that conversation today on the podcast. Hope you enjoy it. I hope that Arnie speaks to you, that you get something out of this. And I hope it makes you a more dedicated learner and reader, and that you grow, because we talk a lot about self-development and becoming a better person, becoming filling your toolbox with talents. So Arnie is like a master gardener. He's a hot rod builder.
I was going to say, he's not a mechanic.
Like hot rod, like from design, from end to end, engines, tranny, like the whole thing. He's a thinker. He's an artist, building sculptures from out of metal to painting to. He's an engineer. He's just a remarkable person, and his wife is as well, and she has been a blessing to my life and to my wife's life. So without further ado, we're going to jump in. Enjoy the show. Welcome to the Gritty Podcast. I'm your host, Brian Call, and I am in Oregon City, Oregon. I'm not far from the Treehouse, which is just down the road here. And I am here with a good friend of mine, Arnie Chupp, who owns Chupp Hot Rods, Maplewood Industries, and what else would you say? That it?
As far as what I own?
And Arnie he's an artist, a metal fabricator, welder.
Gardener, artist.
Yes.
Yeah.
And, I met Arnie, I think I was 23 or 25, something like that. I can't remember now.
We, when we moved into this place, it was that week that Katie had her wedding.
Oh, okay.
If that helps.
So when my sister Katie got married, oh, wow.
We were sitting out on the back deck listening to the music down the hill.
Yeah. I remember meeting you guys a little bit, and then, over the years, so just to speed ahead, I wanted to have Arnie on the podcast. I've wanted to do this for a long time, in fact, because Arnie and your wife, Sharon, have been hugely influential in my life, because prior to meeting you, I went to college, I did a mission in Japan, and, I was young. I just got married for a little bit of time, and somehow or another, got this wild hair to build a treehouse and then live in it. And I needed some metal fabrication done to help engineer and build this treehouse. And I had read a few books and done a little research on it, and I had plans on how I wanted to do it. I owned a construction company at the time, and I was going to PS, Portland State University, in the evenings, some night classes and a couple morning classes, and then I'd work in the afternoons. And I had done BYU for a couple years, but had decided I wanted to do a little more construction, so I kind of pulled out of school for a while and decided to pursue classes at PSU while doing construction at the same time. And then I was like, I want to build a house that I can live in, that I don't have to pay a mortgage on. And building a treehouse seemed like a fun and interesting idea, and my wife was all about it. And so as we pursued the process of getting ready to build one, figured out how I was going to do it. I called a bunch of people who had built houses, tree houses, talked to them. I had read a few books, bought a few books on it, had learned more about trees, more about construction, as far as building in a tree. And then I had gone around town looking for someone to build these metal brackets for me to actually build this treehouse as part of the process. And I had gone to a bunch of places around town here in Oregon City, drove out some places, and it wasn't a complicated thing I needed built, but I had a hard time getting people to build it. And then my parents were saying, well, our neighbor, he welds. Why don't you go talk to him? And then that's when I met you, I think.
Well, it really fit into my wheelhouse because that's what I did for a living.
It did.
Yeah.
Tell me from your perspective, because it's been a long time. It's been 20 years. since we met. And what did you think? What was your impression? I come up the hill from the house and I'm like, I want to build a tree house.
Well, it was really a godsend for me. My son got killed he was 22, and it turns out he's the same exact age you are. And we moved to this property from Stafford Road to get away from that house, to create a new environment. And it was just too hard to live there. Mm-hmm. And so we moved out here, and here comes this young guy that, I'm in a mourning process from the loss of my son. You come walking up and you have an energy and a personality and an outgoingness that was just like my son had. And it was like a second chance. It was like a do-over. Mm-hmm. And I just remember you coming in and wanting something done, and it's like a treehouse. And I got so excited. It's like, man, I can do this, and it was just fit into kind of that fantasy that every little kid has about building a treehouse. And if it's working with a young guy who was outgoing and innovative and creative, and it's like you were a godsend to me at that time. I mean, it's somebody I could reach out to when I didn't have that available to me. So.
For me, at first, when I came into the shop, I saw all the things that you've done. Primarily, hot rods, and who isn't enamored with hot rods? That's a young guy. I was blown away by the things that you've done and the cars in your shop, and I was absolutely taken by that for sure right off the bat. The creativity and in the past, and hearing about, I wanted to learn more about what you'd done, so I'm down there building this house right next to you.
Yeah.
Building this tree house, hanging from ropes, climbing trees. And as you're watching it come together, and you would come down and help me figure things out, I would say, because you have that engineering structural kind of understanding of I can build it, but I don't know how to build it strong.
Yeah.
And I remember, coming back to you over and over again. Okay, look, I have this deck and I want to build it like this, but instead of having supports come from underneath, I think you were saying, well, why not cables from above? And then those would structurally hold up the deck without these supports underneath. And we'd use turnbuckles, and we could do this and do that. And slowly we built this treehouse together. And somewhere along the lines, as we did that, I would come up here in the morning and, in your shop and in the room we're in right now. And you'd be sitting here, just having a little bit of a cup of tea or something, and in the early mornings. And I knew I could catch you in there when you weren't working yet, and talk for a little bit.
Yeah.
And pretty soon our talks turned from 15 minutes to 2 hours.
Yeah. Part of my healing process from my son's dying was relating to young men and passing on whatever information or wisdom or whatever. And it kind of developed into a mentoring purpose in my life. And so I have so many people that come into my shop and want to do projects together. And invariably we sit here and talk for an hour, and then we go out and work for an hour.
And the reason I wanted to have you on the podcast is, and this is just a true and honest statement, that you have probably been, aside from my parents, the most influential person in my life.
Wow.
And I'd say that because being at the age that I was, and newly married, and there's a lot of people in my life that have blessed me and again given me much. But you put me on a path of reading books that I had never thought about reading. Mm. I started to think about things about life in a, I guess in the way of what's it all for, and what is meaning, and those things are always things I thought deeply about and wondered about, but I didn't have the broad spectrum of philosophy and understanding that you brought to the table. And I remember coming up and asking you one day, is it okay? Like, would you be okay with sitting down and like once a week having like a Bible study together? Because I wanted to hear about, understand the Bible from your perspective. Because my perspective, I grew up in the LDS church, and I love my faith, and I've learned a lot. But I wanted to hear, from your perspective, what you knew and how you read it, and you said yes, and that basically led to, I don't know,
lots and lots of interesting discussions. Yeah,
years of discussions, and we went from Bible to then just any book, all subjects and topics,
life, C.S.
Lewis, and you would read books and share them with me, and I'd read books and share them with you, and it was having those discussions and those ideas running through my mind, and having someone to talk about them with was powerful. It also was empowering because you really were able to, when two people get married, they got to learn to love each other, live together, take care of each other. And you and Sharon were really good about teaching us, you and your wife, about, you had done some counseling. You had been to some counseling. You had learned some things about relationships that we didn't know. And these tools were powerful. And so Suzanne and I would be at odds over something. We'd come up here together, sit down, talk to you guys. And I thought I was 100% right about the situation.
You do always, so.
And then I sit down with you guys and you're like, yeah, Brian, you know what? Have you thought about this or this or this? And it really helped me really see big gaps in my understanding and my character, and then work on those things. And so the influence has been strong. And so I wanted to sit down because I wanted to tap into some things and hear your thoughts on some subjects that I think are extremely life-changing, meaningful.
Yeah.
And so on that note, I do want to ask you about meaning, because I think it was like 14 years ago or something. We were sitting here at your house, and I said, we were talking about something, and you said, we were talking about the news, what was going on in the world, and you said, nobody talks about meaning anymore. Meaning isn't part of our conversations. Meaning isn't in life. We all talk about the weather and logistics, but everyone avoids meaning in the news and in so many places. And I didn't understand what you meant for a while. I was like meaning, and I was trying to think about it, and I kind of understood it, but I had to play with that idea for a while. I have some thoughts on it, but I want to hear what you think.
That's a big subject. I think our society has developed this ideology that we can't have any judgment, that everybody has a right to their own, to do what they feel is right and in their own eyes. And part of that really interplays with meaning, because if you take meaning, for me, meaning revolves around purpose. And my purpose comes from understanding why I'm here, what I was called to do, what my giftedness is and finding how that fits into the world around me. And in my place, that involves God. It involves a code of conduct. It involves right and wrong. It involves judgment. And that smacks up against our culture in the way that we promote a non-judgment about all things. And so, for me, meaning in my life depends around purpose. And I believe that in my mother's womb, I was designed with gifts, abilities, passions, and talents that God placed in me for a specific reason. And He placed me in a place, and it's up to me to cultivate those and to become who God made me to be. And in that, I find my purpose. And so I see that I'm a mentor. I end up mentoring people. And there's no greater satisfaction in life than walking away from a situation feeling like you hit the mark, that's what you were called for. You fulfilled a purpose. I can't think of anything in life that equates to the same degree of satisfaction and meaning than feeling like you fulfilled what you were called to do.
You know, we were talking about Jordan Peterson the other day.
Yeah.
And in his book, 12 Rules for Life, he says there's a chapter, so I think my favorite chapter in the entire book, that he says, do what is meaningful, not what is expedient.
Or fun, or, yeah.
You keep talking about having this goal to be happy. If we could all just be happy. He said, what a dumb goal.
Like only Jordan Peterson can say.
Like, what is happiness? What does that even mean?
Yeah.
He's like, don't pursue happiness. Pursue meaning.
Right.
And, you know, what is your take on that? You know, expediency versus meaning, and pursuing meaning versus happiness. And
well, a lot of times happiness is just an emotion. And, you know, when that emotion dies down, then you feel like your happiness is gone. And a lot of times it's around feeding self. Your self-interest, selfishness, and that feeds right into materialism, kind of that me, get for me. Mm-hmm. And for me, meaning is when I can share into someone else's life, or I can share out of my excess to what benefits other people, much more so than myself. There's a lot more meaning in giving than receiving, and it's kind of a cliche, but it really is true. If you can bless somebody else, there's kind of an inward swell that comes inside of you that's just fulfilling, and that's where meaning comes from.
You gave me an analogy yesterday about meaning.
As far as finances if a man goes out and works and he receives pay, he has $1 in his hand. You know, he has that money. It's an equivalency. It's a fair trade. He worked for a certain amount and he has something to show for that. Then he can go to a store. He can lay that $1 down and say, I want to buy this loaf of bread. And there's a fair exchange. I've given you something and you've given me something. And so there's a pride in an accomplishment, in reaching a fair change and working for the value that he just presented. And so he can walk away feeling good about himself, about the contribution he made, about the purchase he made, about providing for his family. But if you give that same guy that $1 and say, go buy something, when he walks up to the counter, what does he say? What is the message inside of himself? There isn't any. He got, freely he gave. You know, he just.
You talked about that. I was saying that there's a thing where the guy gets $1 for free, walks in and says, "Hey, I want XYZ," because someone gave him the money, and he just goes to buy it. He didn't earn the $1. He didn't put in the hours and the time. And in a way, it's when you asked me the other day, well, what is he saying when he does that? And I was like, he's kind of saying, give me something for doing nothing.
Right. Yeah, there's no dignity in that. And there's no meaning in that. It's just selfishness,
It's a deep thought because, to realize that that the work, which I think is cleansing, putting in hours, working hard is like it's built into our DNA and our human soul,
Right.
To work and to earn your key, where you're at. There's so much dignity and pride in that value. And then to be able to use that independent, to be able to use that to go and, pay for things that then as a fair exchange of my skills and my hard work and my labor in exchange for something of value that's in exchange for what I know how to do. There is a certain amount of dignity and meaning that comes from that, but meaning isn't what's discussed. It's happiness. And so it's like, well, why not? Man, it sure would be great if I could just win the lottery and then I could just go buy everything I wanted and have some fun.
Read about those stories. They end in disaster. If you go back to Adam and Eve, in a biblical context, this was before the fall. This was in a perfect environment. God had created this garden, and it was perfect. Why did he make them work? He gave Adam work to do. He said, go name all the animals, go do this. And then he'd come to walk with them in fellowship in the evening, say, how'd it go? I think work has a connotation of drudgery, of like part of the curse, and it really is
part of the meaning.
What produces meaning in us. Yeah.
And I think that's why Jordan Peterson was saying, don't pursue happiness, pursue meaning. And part of that then means it's actually the discomfort, it's the work, it's the toil that we derive meaning from, where actually, as a side effect, happiness can swell, but it's not the pursuit.
But happiness depends on so many external things, and meaning comes from internal things. The more character you have, the more ability you have to lay down yourself and serve people around you and to give out of your excess. That all comes from inside. Happiness is a lot of times equated with external things. It's like, what can I get? What's the music? What's the people around me? What's the environment? It's external. And we don't really have control over that.
It's interesting because, when I was gifted the book "Man's Search for Meaning" by Viktor Frankl,
right.
And I was fairly young, about
That's a heavy book.
About the time I met you, and I remember reading the book and thinking about just the toil and the pain of going through such a horrific experience in Auschwitz and concentration camp like that, and how they degraded other human beings, and yet he talked about finding meaning in that place, finding meaning in humanity, and
it was from helping others, basically, yeah.
And to see that it's not pursuing happiness. It was pursuing meaning, and he saw people who, despite their circumstances, refused to become animals, and actually even do so much as to die for to stay true to helping other people.
Mm-hmm.
And it was, I don't know, it had me thinking heavily about what life is all about, and to be able to find meaning under those circumstances, because it'd be very, very easy to become the victim and just say, I'm the way I am because people made me be this way. But to have the character to not do that, I always wonder, could I do it?
I think in my context, as far as my faith goes, if I'm called to be there, there's going to be grace for it. And so it's a matter of tapping into that and accessing that. I find myself in a place right now where all my whole life's on hold, and I'm taking care of my wife. And there's a great deal of meaning in that. I've found surprising to myself, because I had always put myself in that situation wondering, could I do it, or would I do it, or would I feel resentful? And there's just a well of compassion for me to tap into in taking care of my wife. And so I'm surprised a little bit, but I shouldn't be. I mean, the grace is there for me to tap into, and I'm experiencing it as I work.
I think that's true. I remember a few years back, we were talking and you said, when you look back on your life, if you're humble and you look back on it and you see where you are today, and you've been striving to try to be, to live your life with meaning, you look back and you can see providence in your life, and where certain crossroads and certain things came up and you were able to direct your life in one way or another, and you see basically the hand of God in where you are.
Yeah, it boils down to kind of free will versus the sovereignty of God question. How much of my life is preordained, or how much of it is my own choice. And thankfully, it hasn't all been my own choice. It's like I tell the young guys that I mentor, every place that you find yourself is preparation for the next place you'll be. And so if you go through life with that as a goal, then you apply yourself, be a learner, be a reader, learn as much as you can about where you're at right now, because it's all the preparation for the next thing that you're going to do in life. And when you are my age and you look back at it, you can just see that thread go all the way through there. And apply yourself, learn principles, and grow. That's where meaning is.
I remember, when Suzanne got sick and she was going through chemotherapy and battling cancer, that for me, it was hard for me. And I went through various stages of growth from that experience. And
anger and grieving and all the other pieces that go with it.
Yeah. And I can look back and I feel like there were, you talk about grace, that when I felt like I received the strength needed to do what needed to be done during that time, and it also forever changed who I am.
It's empowering, isn't it? To see yourself step up in those places.
You lost your son at a young age, and when that happened, just knowing you and Sharon, one of the hardest things you've ever experienced in your life.
The hardest, yeah.
And my question, is, with that loss, it changed you.
Yeah.
And in what way and how?
Yeah, there was a previous life and a post life. It's just, I think it was a process of trying to regroup and put your life back together. And there's a tremendous amount of loss when you lose a child. It's not just that you won't ever see them again. You have all these expectations of being at their wedding and seeing their grandkids and going to their grandkids' games. And we carry that with us with all our kids. It's our dreams for them. And so my dreams for him were lost when he was gone. And so I can never escape that. It's the empty chair at Thanksgiving that breaks your heart. It's the empty place at Christmas, but it's also, I never got to meet his wife, never got to see his kids, never got to experience that. And so the loss of expectation is really a huge one for me. I spent about 2 years feeling sorry for myself and lack of motivation and just didn't want to go on. It was just the darkest place. It affected my whole business, my life, everything. And I come to the realization that I need to live for me. I need to live for the rest of my family. It's no fair for me just to check out. And from there, I gradually got into reaching out to other young kids. I mean, if I had that opportunity to do over, I would get in his face and not let him do, the behaviors that he was doing. And I just thought, I need to take that confidence that I feel about trying to change him and change the other kids around me that are struggling too. There's a lot of kids in their early 20s who are just kind of lost. They're directionless. They haven't had the family to give them a good footing in life, and they just need good principles, whether it's psychological or financial or relationship principles, and just need somebody they can sit down and talk to that's safe. And so my whole mentoring thing just kind of developed out of trying to reclaim that ground that was robbed from me, from my son. And it just gave me such a compassion and kind of a guardianship kind of thing over young men that were directionless. And so over my lifetime, just more and more, people get in trouble. Oh, you ought to go talk to Arnie, and it just kind of morphed into that. It wasn't through any organized effort.
No, I feel like my life, like I said, my life just permanently changed from our association. And one of the areas, I was always willing to take a risk, always willing to maybe do some entrepreneurial.
I've seen you dangling from trees.
Always been willing to do some entrepreneurial type things, go out and see if I could make it. And if I failed, I failed. But you helped me find tools and understand ways of actually succeeding. It's one thing to be bold and to take a risk. It's another thing to actually succeed. And the know-how, you imparted a lot of wisdom to me, especially in the area of finance. Mm. And I see a lot of people today who are trapped in, revolving debt and in bondage to all these loans and early on, as we started to get to know each other, you started to teach me, told me certain books to read, and then that set me on my own journey to then grow from there. And it was under your influence that I figured out, reading The Millionaire Next Door and
Rich Dad, Poor Dad.
Rich Dad, Poor Dad. Yeah. And these things, I read them, we talked about them, and then I did them. And I remember reading Dave Ramsey and the Total Money Makeover, and okay, I'm going to follow this plan, and then selling everything I owned to try to get out of debt. And then eventually getting debt free.
Yeah.
And then since that time, just we don't borrow money. We don't use credit cards. We we don't do debt. And that has changed, fundamentally changed my life to the point where now it's been so long, I don't even think about finances very often or debt. But if I think back on it, at times, if I stop and pause, the average American, probably listener to my show, is embroiled in mountains of debt to the point where it feels like they can't get out from under it, and it consumes 2/3 or a third of their paycheck or half of it. Yeah. And they feel trapped. What are your ideas about that debt, and, how do you instruct the young people that come to you and talk to you?
One of the primary things that I see with young guys who are in debt is the lack of the ability for delayed gratification. And that kind of goes into meaning and happiness and chasing material things. And, we're just bombarded every day with advertisements. You need this, you need that, you need this, and they show these happy people. And it's surprising how permeated that is in our mind, that if I just worked and had that, I would be happy. So delayed gratification is probably the number one thing that I talk to young people about. The ability to put off till tomorrow, like Dave Ramsey says, live like no one else today so that you can live like no one else tomorrow.
Right.
We did Dave Ramsey before there was a Dave Ramsey. My wife and I both came from poor families, and we just decided we didn't want to be poor, and so how could we get ahead? And it was resisting the temptation to borrow. And so we made the kind of covenant between us that we'd never borrow money on things that depreciate, because you get screwed on both ends, and it's just a loser. So if you're going out buying a brand new car and you drive it off the lot, you just lost $3,000 immediately, and then you're paying the other $3,000 over your interest. I mean, there's no way to win in that, and so I've had a wise mentor in business too that instructed me. But more than that, it was just coming from a poor family and saying, I don't want to live like that, and trying to figure out what the principles were to getting ahead.
Exactly. It was those principles that started to permeate. I started to figure out, because you're told, if you borrow a little bit here, if you use other people's money to get rich, and it's so easy to pick up a credit card, especially when I was growing up. I can remember just asking for a credit card in college, and they're like, here's $5,000.
Yeah.
Well, it's like, wow. All right.
Free money.
Yeah. And then I'll figure out, it's only this much per month.
Yeah.
So I'll pay that. And then it's quadruple that. And then further as the interest rate goes up. And now I'm stuck in this $5,000 hole. And I actually don't really care about what I got out of it.
Yeah.
What I purchased. Like, it was not meaningful.
The happiness was fleeting. Yeah.
And so it took some time, but being able to break those chains and get out of debt was a pivotal thing for us. And it wasn't easy. It was 2 steps forward, 1 back, 2 steps forward, 1 back, because we're weak, we're human. We messed up.
I depart from Dave Ramsey a little bit in that I don't think that it's necessarily bad to borrow money on things that appreciate. I've invested heavily in real estate, and real estate's done really well for me. And I've had mortgages stack up and been in debt, so to speak, to the bank, but it's always been calculated. But I don't borrow money for things that depreciate.
Yeah. Yeah, and you and Sharon have really leveraged a rental market where you basically had someone pay for your homes.
Yeah.
As they rented it, and you were able to, as a retirement, as a future wealth building endeavor.
Yeah.
There's so many benefits to the approach that you took, and you guys would sell everything, save up all the money you had, get a loan on a little home.
I'd drive $200 Volkswagens until the wheels fall off, and buy another one. And my kids were always asking me, well, why don't you buy a new car? Because it's a bad investment. I'm saving my money for another house. So we would save and scrimp, and we never made a lot of money per se at one time, but we'd save up $20,000-$30,000, and we'd buy another rental house. And then next 3 or 4 years, or 2 or 3 years, we'd save up another, buy another. Pretty soon you have a fairly sizable asset portfolio.
Mm-hmm.
And so we can live comfortably now, and when my body doesn't feel like it wants to work anymore.
Yeah. That's like Dave Ramsey said, live like no one else now, so you can live like no one else later.
Yeah.
There's and I think there's meaning in that, right? Because it wasn't given to you.
Yeah.
It's something you worked for.
Well, the scriptures say, look at the squirrels, look at the animals. They gather and set up in the winter, and that's the program.
Mm-hmm.
When you're healthy and you're in your 20s, it's time to start gathering nuts.
I know. Yeah. I also, at some point in my life, I'd say, I don't know, maybe 10 years ago, I had this vision of having all of these assets and all this value, and then retiring and then doing all these things I wanted to do. And at some point I realized it for me that the idea of not working was completely and utterly unappealing to me if I was really honest with myself.
Really? Yeah.
I don't know that will ever stop working till the day I die. And when I say working, it's like, Dave Ramsey will even say, do something you love and you'll never work a day in your life. That old saying. And it's like, there's a lot of truth in that. I do what I love. And so but
you don't love it every day.
No.
Yeah.
And it's a grind at times. And I have to learn new skills. I got to understand how to operate a camera, and and the computers are always changing, and the editing, and then marketing and monetizing a brand and all that stuff. It's always ever learning, ever challenging, ever growing. And
I think that's the key right there. You're ever growing. The people that I mentor, I'm talking about learning as many skills as you can, especially to artists that are trying to get ahead. We have a creative brain. We have things going on in our head, and we try to bring them to reality so that we can share them with other people. That's all dependent on how many tools are in your bag. If the only tool you have is a hammer, you're never going to get that creative thing into reality. And so I see that metaphorically with people walking around, and the only tool they have is a hammer, and they keep running into problems and they can't figure it out.
Right.
Be a reader, be a learner. Every one of us have a tool bag. Stuff as many tools as you can into there, because when you hit a problem, when you hit an opportunity, you want to be able to grab all the resources you can. So, as far as keys to success, get a bigger tool bag.
Yeah.
Keys to relationship, it's all the same.
Yeah, that was really eye-opening to sit down with you and learn more about relationships and love languages and the right brain, left brain, and just all these ideas that help you understand. Because I used to think, there was a time when I was younger, I didn't value certain personalities. I just didn't think they brought a lot to the table, given my personality and how I saw the world. But as I learned about different personalities and different traits that people have, I started to see, first of all, like where I lack gifts that they have, the other kind of person with the opposite personality than I do.
Right.
But also where recognizing their value and what they bring to the table that I don't, it was eye-opening.
We had a lot of problems in our early marriage because we were just the opposite in everything. And Sharon was always trying to change me, and I thought she could only see half of the world. And part of that was true, but we just didn't realize the validity of different types of people and what they see. I think creative people have a little bit more problem with that than others, just because I put myself in that category, being kind of opinionated and this is the right way and all those things.
Yeah.
But once we started relying on each other and seeing that each other had a valid way of seeing the world, it really opened things up to us benefiting from each other's strengths.
Yeah, and what do you say to young people that are having trouble with a marriage or relationship,
I think ultimately all divorces end up in selfishness, trying to serve self first. It's like, she's not doing this for me and she's not doing that for me. And why isn't she doing that? I mean, that's the question you should be asking, What can I do to free her up to do those kinds of things that she has inside herself? But the other thing is resentment. Resentment is like a smoke alarm in your soul. And if you can get in tune with resentment when the feelings first come up, it's really a barometer on, should I try to resolve this? Can I suppress it? Can I put it down? Do I need to? I mean, it's like, hey, we're going over to our in-laws this weekend. Okay, maybe that's not a pleasant experience, but where is learn the negotiating tools? Well, let's do that this weekend and you can have a great time, and let's go to the car show next weekend. Figure out ways that you can do it without resentment. If that resentment starts to well up, you got to take care of it, because ultimately it will kill the relationship.
Jordan Peterson has a section in 12 Rules for Life that he talks about raise your children so that adults like them.
I thought that was cool.
And it is such a true and honest concept. And at first it sounds like, well, that's silly, or that's, I'm not actually, doing my kids a favor doing that. I'm being too hard on them, or they're kids. You can't expect adults to like them. And no, he says, you really need to raise your children in a way that adults like that. That means teach them to be polite, to be respectful, guide them. You can't let them just throw a fit on the floor and scream at other people. And, and he's like, parents think that they're doing their child a favor because they're not maybe hard on them, or they allow them to misbehave. They're at the grocery store. Kids, I want a candy bar. And you're like, no, you're not going to get a candy bar. The kid throws a fit on the floor. And you're like, look, okay. And you'd start this bribery thing where, okay, fine. If you stop crying, then we'll get you some bubble gum.
Yeah.
If I'm not giving you the candy bar, oh, okay, I'll take the bubble gum. And the parent, gets in the car. The kid still throws a fit a bunch of times out the door. They get home, and then he's like, the parent still resents the fact that their child acted that way.
Yeah.
And subconsciously, whether it's conscious or subconsciously, parents have a way of making their kid pay one way or another for how they acted. And so later the kid says, hey, can we have, spaghetti tonight. And just to spite them because of how they acted in the store, the parent will say, no, we're not having spaghetti. We're going to have salad. And the kid,
A little passive aggressive.
And the child doesn't know why.
Yeah.
Because it's not tied to their other behavior.
The time passed.
The time has passed. But this resentment is toxic. And the parent actually, and then the kid is confused. And they say, can I play with the iPad? And the parent says, no, because they're still mad about, I clean my room. It doesn't matter. And he, as a psychologist, he's talked about how he's observed this. Parents often aren't even in tune enough to realize that resentment. Like they don't even see it.
Right.
And I started to ask myself, do I do that at times? Am I passive aggressive to my wife, to my kids, because of some resentment that I'm harboring because of something that they did that I sort of didn't confront at the time, didn't pitch the battle at the time and have the discussion then. And then later I'm resentful over it. And then I get payback one way or another, consciously or subconsciously.
Yeah, absolutely. Resentment's a killer. I mean, it just eats away at us. And the thing is, if you suppress it, then you don't have control over when it pops its ugly head up. At the most inopportune times, you blow off the handle, you make bad judgments. There's all kinds of things. The original offense grows in your mind and gets bigger. Resentment's just a killer. It really is.
How do you address it? Like, how do you handle it when it?
Have tried to cultivate an awareness right off the bat. Is, if I'm put in that situation, just a quick check inside. Am I going to resent this or not? Can I give this freely? And if I can, give it. If I can work out an exchange and say, maybe let's do that, and then I can do this over here. And a lot of times I've found they're more than willing to do that because they want to do what they're, they want to go to their in-laws' place.
It becomes a give.
Yeah. Then you're looking for a win-win instead of a lose-lose situation.
I see that a lot. Like, I go on, I work hard at skills like shooting a bow. I work hard at being healthy and in shape so I can go and do some very physically demanding hunt, let's say in New Zealand's Southern Alps, or Idaho's wilderness. And, and I work hard and I try. And let's say I'm bow hunting elk in Idaho or Colorado and it's backcountry, it's tough. And I put in time and I work hard, and then I see a friend of mine walk out there and in 2 days accomplish what I've been trying to. In 20, I come home a failure. They come home, successful, accomplishing a goal, a task. And it's very easy to become resentful and jealous right away. Like these emotions, they're, and I see it a lot in social media in the world today, Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, it doesn't matter. Someone does something remarkable or something that you're trying to do but can't do. And this ugly thing about humanity, this ugly part of us that rises up and says,
I hope he dies.
Yeah. Like, he cheated, or he we minimize the accomplishment and we start to justify our own failure, and that, there's that other chapter where Peterson says, surround yourself with people that genuinely celebrate your success. And I think it goes along with this resentment piece, that when I start to feel any kind of emotion of envy or jealousy creep up in me when I see a friend, especially, or another individual achieve something because of hard work, because of their they put in the hours and the sacrifice, and then a little bit of luck, and boom, they have this opportunity or this achievement. I look at that now, and when I feel those emotions, I immediately address them. I try to keep them out of my life, because I see how rampant they are in today's world, how much people immediately turn to hate, jealousy, and resentment. And that resentment I see tear people apart.
It does. It's a killer. We all have issues. And when those issues get smacked up against someone else's, like you said, success, it creates a huge opportunity for us to harbor resentment and bitterness and anger. Those aren't free emotions. They come with a cost. And you need to redeem those as quick as you can, because the cost gets higher the longer they stay. And if you harbor those, they'll come out in your body. They'll come out in the way you act. They'll come out in the way you relate to other people. I just had an opportunity this last week. We have a patient advocate for my wife to navigate the medical situation that she's in. And so that patient advocate is a really strong woman. And she has parental ways of communication, which smacks up against me as a daydreaming right-brainer going through a left-brain school. All I had was these bossy black and white left-brain school teachers. And so it left a mark on me. I don't particularly care for that style of communication in person. Mm-hmm. And so she was saying things to me that I could feel myself just inside bristle at, and I didn't want to do them, And I recognized right away what it was. I mean, I'm reacting not to her necessarily. I'm reacting to all those people in my past who pre-wired me to have certain prejudices. And so I called her up and I said, we got to have coffee. And so we got together, and I just said, I have accumulated these issues in my life, and it really presents me with an obstacle. And so when I hear parental conversation to me as an adult, I bristle, and I want to get the most out of what you have to give me. But I'm asking you if you could, work with me. I have certain ways that I hear better than others. And if you could speak in those kinds of ways, I can get the most out of what you have to give. And the conversation just, I was shaken. I was nervous, but I also realized that if I didn't do that, we're going to have a breach, and I couldn't get the most out of what she had to give. And she even thanked me for having the conversation. She said, you did a good job. It's like,
yeah,
it's hard, but just step up and do it. I don't have any resentment against her at this point. I'm free from it, but guys in particular, you ask them how they're doing, good or bad. That's their vocabulary.
Mm-hmm.
What I'm saying is, get in tune with what's happening inside. And if you feel something inside that feels disconcerting, it feels off, check it out, feel what it is, and then take care of it. And just another tool in the bag. Yeah, it makes problem solving that much easier.
Well, I can think about when I look at someone, every time I look at someone accomplish something, regardless of age, regardless of gender, regardless of me, I sit there, I look at it, and then I deliberately move toward a sense of gratitude for them, and toward being thankful for what they were able to do. Really give them their due for what they've done, and rather than harbor resentment, I celebrate for them, with them.
One of the things that's really helped me out in that regard is in my belief system that God designs us with certain abilities, talents, gifts, and passions. There are those things I can do, but there's also a list of things I can't do. And for me to embrace the things I can't do frees me up to encourage people who do things better than I do.
Yeah, I found that being able to say, nice job, congratulations, and just be genuinely excited about someone else's success is so healthy for me and for them. And immediately when I dive into them and I'm outward thinking instead of inward thinking, and I say, how did you do it? And what happened? And my natural curiosity and love for other people will come out, and it'll overpower that resentment and jealousy feeling that's starting to come. And then as I hear about their story and I see how it unfolds, I go, wow, like that is so awesome, And
it empowers them to do better. And you just stumbled onto a key to developing friendship and being a friend.
Yeah.
Be an encourager.
That, it's so funny because we're taught a lot in society that if you look out for number one, take care of yourself, be that person that, is very inward focused, that you're going to achieve some real happiness, get there. And I have found that it's about outward focus, really. It's about
giving it away.
Yeah. Yeah.
But you have to be healthy in order to have an excess to give away. And so it's kind of, you got to work on yourself, to be the best person you can be, because you give out of your reserve, or else you give out of your need.
And that's true.
There's a lot of people who give out of their need to give to get.
Right.
Yeah.
It's sort of like Jordan Peterson will say about cleaning your room. One of the military guys wrote that I did a book review with Corey Jacobson once on, make your bed. This concept of before you go out in the world and try to fix it, and be outward thinking, you're going to save the world, change the climate, whatever it is, like get yourself in order first.
Pluck the log out of your own eye.
Yeah, like try live in a moral fashion and actually try to make yourself. Then after that, you can maybe, in all your broken, screwed up humanity and messed up personality, maybe then you actually could, make a mark or improve the world itself. But you are improving the world when you just make yourself an honest person, or someone with more integrity. Great. We can all improve in our character. And by improving your character, that's that first step, that's number one before you can go out and, it's some of, we talked about this the other day. Some of those people that come out and they tell you, you need to change who you are, Arnie. You need to live better. You need to be this way. You need to do that. You need you. Often those people are the ones that have the biggest deficits.
Yeah.
And we could all just spend a little more time fixing ourselves before we go and fix the world.
We just need to give out of excess, and that gives with no expectation of return. You give out of your need, and you never feel fulfilled, because you're always looking for what the rebound's going to be, what you're going to get back. And people never appreciate to the extent what you do for them that you want them to appreciate. That need never gets met if you're giving out of need.
Explain that further. Like when you say give out of excess versus give out of your need.
Well, it's giving without expectation of return. There's so much manipulation going on in giving out of need. If I feel lonely, or if I feel like I need some affirmation, I'll go praise somebody else in hoping in return they'll say something kind to me, or you're giving out of your need. And you say something to them and they say, oh, thanks. And they walk off, and then you go back sad, or mad because, well, they didn't understand, If you're genuinely giving out of excess, you're saying, boy, I appreciate that. You did a good job. I'm proud of you. Or, you're not looking for something to come back to you.
Yeah.
And so that kind of giving is giving out of love. The other is trying to get what you can get. It's given out of selfishness. So
Yeah. No, okay. So I like that. I want to ask you about what your thoughts are on, we've had many discussions about life and its meaning and so on, but I remember years ago we were having a discussion on new atheism and atheism in general. And, we've had many talks on this, and, there's things I appreciate about Sam Harris. I've listened to many of the things that he's, debates that he's had with others, and there's many atheists out there that have a rational view of the world, and one that's really based, they believe, on scientific things, and in so many ways, that's the declaration that there's no such thing as God, and there's no, purpose to life. What are your thoughts on that? And, you've had many years where you've thought about it, and we've talked about it.
I might be too simple to really understand the complexities of their arguments. I just can't fathom. I can't reach a conclusion that would make me an atheist. Looking at the complexities of this world and just the physical world, and there's so much we don't understand about it. And the more we dig into it, the more there is to understand. There's so much design behind the smallest part of life that I just can't wrap my head around. This is an accident, or as just a happenstance. There is a creator. I mean, that's my bottom line. I can't really grasp their arguments.
Where does it take you if you follow an argument to the end?
Nihilism, meaninglessness. I mean, what is the purpose of life? If that's the argument, then do whatever you feel like doing. There's no moral code. It's all about happiness now because you're going to die. It leads to not thinking about the other person, not caring, self-centeredness. It doesn't work for me.
It's pretty simple.
Just doesn't work. Life is, there's so many evidences of God in my life that it's hard for me to grasp that.
For me, as I've, explored arguments and delve into different, philosophies on existence and meaning, I come to a conclusion that it's pretty simple, really. Some have broken it down recently where you have, if you believe that nothing matters and this is just a big accident, then there's no responsibility, right? There's no need to do any of the things that we've talked about today. Just self-satisfied.
Yeah.
Just do whatever you need to do to feel happy in the moment. It removes all meaning from life, which is what we've just spent the last hour talking about,
right,
in different ways.
Well, I think C.S. Lewis said, there's no culture that we know of where cheating is a virtue.
Mm-hmm.
Where did that moral code come from?
I think it's very simplistic to just say, to undermine the idea of deeper meaning in this universe, in that there's some cosmic force out there that actually supersedes where we are today and who we are. I think it's very simplistic to say, that this is just
unprovable.
And unprovable.
Yeah.
Yeah. Versus, in many ways, I feel like if you want to prove in some ways, the existence of something greater than ourselves out there, God, I feel like you just need to look inward a little bit. It's like seems to be built into every one of us. I like what Jordan Peterson says when he says, I don't care what you say. Like, what you say doesn't really matter. It's what you do.
Right.
And your actions.
Because you're acting on your belief.
You're acting on your belief.
Yeah.
Words are just words. So when you say you don't believe, but you act as if there are moral consequences to your actions, and that you act as if there is, a God, that right there is, tells me more about what you really believe than what do you know about what you believe? Like, it takes some serious
right
and deep thought and a lifetime of study to really even figure yourself out. You're so complicated.
Yeah.
And messed up.
Yeah, we don't understand a lot about our motives and what we do. But I know there's a war inside, and I get to break the tie.
I like that quote. I don't remember who said it, that the line of good and evil runs through every human heart. And, in today's world, I hear a school shooting comes up, and it's mental illness. And someone does something heinous and horrible and evil to someone, and it's mental illness. And if we could just treat these mental illnesses, then we wouldn't have these things happen in our world. And I'm like, all one has to do is stop and look inside themselves. I don't have a mental illness when I want to do something evil. I just have the potentiality as a human being to be good or to be bad. That is true for every one of us. We struggle with it every day. That isn't being evil isn't an illness. It's humanity.
Yeah. It's indicative of their ideology to go to mental illness first rather than evil. There is mental illness, and there is people who can't make good decisions, and it clouds their mind and all that stuff. But in every one of us, we can identify with the evil before we identify with mental illness. I mean, that comes primary in our mind. But the first thing it seems like the media jumps on is mental illness. And you never hear any of them talk about evil.
Never. Why?
Because that requires judgment.
Which you talked about at the outset.
And they're free of judgment. They don't want to have anything to do with judgment. Because that is indicative of a moral code, and where does that come from? I mean, you get into a whole area that we're hell-bent on taking consequences away from every action that we have.
What's ironic is, back to the simplicity of that, if you believe that there is something that life has deep meaning and purpose, and that there's something greater than what we have here, then you have a strong responsibility to be as morally good as you can be, to reduce the amount of suffering in the world, as much suffering in the world as you can reduce.
Right.
That is your meaning. That is purpose. And it's incumbent upon you to do it because everything you do matters. And so you can see how one viewpoint is, it doesn't matter what you do anyway. There's no free will, and everything you do will lead you down a path, of just take care of number one. We're all going to die anyway, and this has no purpose. But it comes with no meaning. And what's life without meaning? Like, human beings do not exist well. We do not become the best we can be. We don't actually have a true life without meaning. And you strip that away in trade for a free conscience to do bad is really what you've done.
Right. Well, and don't talk about bad, because that makes me feel bad.
Yeah, it's
crazy how far we've come.
It's very, in this secular spaces, it's talking about good and bad is something very, very much avoided. Instead, it's mental illness, it's rational thought.
It's avoided unless it lines up with their ideology, because anybody who doesn't match up with that ideology is automatically bad. Mm-hmm. They have a lot of judgment, but they only use it on people that don't toe the line to their ideology. If I throw a plastic bottle in the ocean, I'm bad.
Right.
They don't mind telling me that.
But it doesn't make sense to me, because if nothing you do, if there's no, to what end? This whole planet's going to disappear anyway.
Well, you and I know that. I mean, because we read the last page.
But you know what I mean? It's like, there's that whole idea of there's no meaning anyway. This is just a big cosmic joke.
Yeah.
Big fat accident.
Where do you get that
Where do you get the moral code that you're espousing right now?
Right.
It's one of the reasons I enjoy hearing from Shapiro, because he's like, nothing you say has a foundation. So how can you say it's wrong for me to pollute? Where are you getting that? Rational thought? No. Rational thought says it doesn't matter what I do.
Right.
Because it's all a cosmic joke anyway.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I find myself,
we're all on that evolutionary process, and the next people or beings that come along will
just take our place.
Yeah.
And so I look at that and I think, but consciousness, is such a mystery, and why we're here, and why we think the way we do, and why we know the things we do, and why we actually are confronted with good and evil, where an elk isn't confronted by good and evil. It's just,
well, you're evil. It's a life or death to him.
Right. It's like I have that conscious moral understanding.
Right.
And so I think it's just a deep, just a lot to think about, but I look at it pretty simply, and that is, you have a choice. You can believe there's meaning and adopt the responsibility that comes with it, or you can believe there's no meaning and live without it,
right,
and be free from any obligations to be a good person.
I think meaning is part of fulfillment. I think everybody's looking for fulfillment in life, consciously or unconsciously. We call it success, and we use cultural standards to judge that by. But I think that fulfillment in life is what we're looking at. I mean, that's what hitting the mark is all about. Like I said, we're designed in our mother's wombs with talents, gifts, talents, and passions, and we're set on a course to develop those in our life. They're given to us in seed form, and you work and learn and cultivate and become the best you can be, and that's where fulfillment comes from. It's kind of like the parable of the talents, and the guy who buried his talent versus the guy who went out and invested. You've been given talents when you're born, and the fulfillment in life is developing those talents and returning tenfold to your master. And so be the best you can be, get the biggest toolbox you can get, and head out, because it's an adventure.
It is. We've read a lot of scripture together. What is one of your favorite scripture stories that has maybe influenced, or that you reference often?
Well, probably the driving force in my life is made out of the deficit in my life too. I was raised in a family where my father was abusive, both physically and emotionally, and was ruthless on me. And I grew up with certain handicaps, and I have huge voids in the area of intimate conversation. My mom had 2 nervous breakdowns growing up, and I grew up in my room building model cars and doing art. And basically, I'm still there doing the same thing with a lot more understanding, I hope. But the deficit of never hearing my dad's approval, I carry that with me as maybe an advantage or disadvantage. But in the end, my striving in life is to hear from God, "Well done, thou good and faithful servant." And that's a motivating factor to me to pursue, to grow, to learn, to do the best I can, and to hear someday when I see him face to face, "Well done, thou good and faithful servant."
And growing up like that, there's a lot of people, I think, that suffer in this world, that come from these backgrounds, that have these hard times, that have to go through those kind of emotional gaps and holes in their life. Thankfully, I mean, I had some incredible parents that were very much there for me. I mean, it's hard to have a better childhood than what I was blessed to have. And it's hard for me to relate just to what it would have been like to grow up in another setting. I try, but I wonder, how do you get past that? How did you get past that? How did you work around it? Or
I've been asked that by therapists or by friends who understand my background. I don't honestly know. I don't. I've used those things, my dad telling me you're never going to amount to anything, as motivators to be the best that I can be. Mm-hmm. I mean, I view him as a negative tutor.
Right.
And so I've tried to use that for inspiration and motivation.
That reminds me
I really don't know.
The Millionaire Next Door, where he talks about those that have become millionaires. What is it that, you have the millionaire mind, you have Millionaire Next Door. Millionaire Next Door is like, what constitutes a millionaire? What are the stats and the facts? Most of them never made more than $70,000 a year.
What are the characteristics of
yeah. And the millionaire mind is, well, what are they like? Personality traits. What are these people like? How did they become what they are? Like, what is it that sets them apart? And so often, some 90% of them were people who were told over and over again they couldn't amount to anything.
Couldn't do it. Yeah.
And we all know of those who believe it and never rise above it. And then there are those who do. And I always wonder, like, what is it? How?
Yeah,
what's the key? How do you
unlock
unlock
that? I wonder that too, people with even quite advantaged childhoods turn into sluggards, So I don't.
In some ways, I can see that, though. Without opposition.
Yeah.
Without struggle, without in a developmental period in your life, without having to overcome some challenge or some difficulty.
Yeah.
If everything was just sort of taken care of for you, you're an invalid. You don't have the skills. You have to develop it at some point to get through the world. So opposition is so important. But sometimes it breaks people.
Jesus recognized that when he said that to some people, I'm a stepping stone, to others, a rock of offense. How do certain people, I don't know. Do you believe in predestination?
Yeah.
I just don't know. Because my own frame of reference is just my own life. so I don't really know what the thinking behind that is. I could speculate that resentment, bitterness, unforgiveness, those things, it wasn't fair, hold people back. You can focus on that. Or you can focus on looking at people who are successful and saying, how'd you get there?
Yeah.
Instead of, give me some of your money. I don't want their money. I just want to know how you got there, because I believe that I can get there too if you tell me.
Well, I remember I was telling you the other day, because you asked me, hey, do you follow anything that Jordan Peterson does? And it just so happens that I've read a lot, and I talk about him a lot, in fact. One of the things that he did that I really enjoyed was his Bible lectures on...
I haven't seen those yet.
Yeah, and he does one on Cain and Abel. And he said, it's like the oldest story, the written story that we have, like on record, distilled to this day. I think it's older than the Adam and Eve story, this story of Cain and Abel, in terms of its, how they trace it back and what they know about it. But the point is that Cain and Abel's story is such an old tale, and it's like 3 paragraphs or something. And he goes into great detail in this 2-hour, kind of lecture on, and these few paragraphs, these few words, and it's really mind blowing, because he talks about how these 2 humans, these first humans, in a way, are working and sacrificing and giving and doing their best, so to speak. Cain's a farmer, and Abel's raises sheep, and here they are doing their thing, and then they bring sacrifices to God, meaning, sacrifice being, let's say, extremely representative of what human beings do when they give back to the world, give back to God. And God says, Abel, you're doing it right. Cain, your sacrifice is not pleasing. It's lacking. You're not doing everything that you could be doing to be what you could be. Cain doesn't like that answer. Cain's bitter about that answer. And he goes and he says, what gives, God? Like, what gives? I am working hard. I give sacrifice too, yet Abel gets everything. Like, this isn't fair. Well, what do I like? I don't like this. And God's answer is, you're delusional. You're actually not doing your part.
Yeah.
Your sacrifice isn't pleasing to me.
Yeah.
You have room to grow. You have things you need to do. And, you do those things and you can be like Abel. And in a way, Abel represents the ideal of everything Cain wishes he could be, everything he wants to be, everything he admires in a person. But what's he do with it?
That resentment destroyed him.
The resentment. He chooses to be bitter. He chooses to be resentful. He chooses to say it's not my fault, that this isn't fair. And then what's he do? He goes out and he kills his ideal. He kills his brother. And so you have 2 modes of being. You have a choice in this world. You can choose to work harder, take ownership, become like Abel, forgive. He's the most popular guy in town. Abel is. Everything goes his way. Everything is perfect. Or you can choose to rail against God and rail against the world and kill the very thing you love the most.
Yeah. And
in the end, Cain is set just deeply, he's like, I can't stand the punishment. It's too great, and in some ways, psychologically, you wonder in how many ways, because he killed the very thing he does he regret that? What is going on in this person's mind who had every potentiality to become his ideal, but yet chose that dark path and that line of good and evil. There it was, and he chose
because he refused to look inside. The question would have been, what am I doing wrong that I can take care of? But I think he knew what he was doing wrong. And that made him want to hide it, and
what
ended up killing him.
And what I think is so, you break down that story and you realize it's old. Human beings,
it happens every day,
have been struggling with good and evil since the beginning of time. And here we are still today with the same struggle. That hasn't changed. There's still there's still darkness in every one of our hearts. And it's like, which way are you going to choose? And I wish the media, I wish the world would talk more, our culture would talk more about choosing good over evil versus this secular, there's no such thing as evil, everything's subjective. And it's mental illness. It's like, then there's no meaning, there's no purpose. There's, like you said at the outset, the world is missing the basic understanding of existence.
Yeah, I believe that. And we think in our little finite minds that if we say there isn't any evil, there isn't. How foolish.
Especially, and Viktor Frankl talks a little bit about this, and so does Alexander Solzhenitsyn when he talks about the Gulag Archipelago. And he says, when you're there, all of a sudden, the clarity of which there is evil in the world is so blatant.
Undeniable.
It's undeniable to the point where you, with so much evil in front of you, it no longer, you almost, it's like they can't deny the existence of something, of a God. It's just like and I think sometimes we're in this world today, fortunately, we haven't been confronted with, especially in the U.S., that stark contrast. We live in such an incredibly wonderful time in so many ways that the reality of evil is easy to look past. Dennis Prager at Prager University made a comment. He was talking to some young people, and he said, and he was asking them about things, and they said, yeah, there's just really no such thing as evil. And he said, in order for you to believe that, you have to live in such an incredibly protected and safe world and place that you don't know at what depths evil can be. Because if you actually experience the evil that others see in other parts of the world or experience, it's just instinctively undeniable that evil exists.
I can agree with that 100%. Yeah.
I know you've read a lot of books, and I want to ask you of, let's say you could only pick three books that you would recommend, like young women read. What would they be?
Well, from my Christian background, it'd be Mere Christianity
by C.S. Lewis.
Yeah. That'll give you the foundation that you need to build everything else on. The books that have meant something to me from a relational standpoint, that would be a spiritual standpoint. From a relational standpoint, it's probably Please Understand Me. There's so much good stuff in there about accepting all the different kinds of people that you alluded to earlier as being valid people. There's just a lot of ways to see the world, and there's a lot of different kinds of people, and we all have our way of seeing things. It would really help us get over trying to change the other person. And then probably Millionaire Next Door. I mean, that would be a spiritual psychological and a
financial
way of. I mean, if you read those 3 books, you'd have a good start. I mean, The Millionaire Next Door is not going to answer all your questions. It's just going to make you have a whole bunch of questions,
right?
And set you on a path of searching. Same with the other books too.
Yeah, good ones. Why gardening?
Trees speak to me, and I don't know how else to explain that. Trees, God speaks to me through trees, and I see people in trees. I see life in trees. There's a metaphor there for everything that I learn. There's trees who are just for beauty. There's trees that are for cultivation. There's trees that I've driven by a huge oak tree in McMinnville when I was commuting to Portland, and this oak tree spoke to me so much, just about the character that I wanted to be in life. It spoke to me about solitude, about weathering storms, about what it provided for the shelter for the animals around it, and the nurture for the soil. And I mean, just driving by that tree so many times and looking at it, and God speaking to me about different things in life, it just took on a prophetic meaning in my life. And so I just see trees as just a wonderful piece of creation. It also is a very artistic avenue, as you can see in the garden. It's like creating a painting, not using oil, but using live pieces. And so you walk through the garden, and it just becomes a serene, feeling, calming place to be.
I remember, I was a missionary in Japan. There's Japanese gardens, everywhere, and I get to see them. And there's Japanese maples, and they're all grafted and grown, and there's all these different types. And I would see Japanese people with bonsai trees as well in their yard, just like 30, 40, 50, or 100 of them just in pots and around. And this care that they have for being, with trees, and being in tune with these trees and these gardens. And there's an undeniable feeling that you walk in to a Japanese garden, and you just see the order that's there, and how things are like cultivated. And it was really mesmerizing. And I began to it became a big part of some of the things I loved about Japan and its culture. And coming home, I had extreme interest in Japanese maples and all the different varieties, and it's just crazy because I have all that interest, and I messed around with some different trees, and I'd talk to Japanese people about their gardens all the time, and then I come here, and my neighbor who's helping me build this tree house is sort of a tree whisperer, and you've got Japanese maples of all types around your home. And I'm looking at these trees, and some of these trees are 20 years old or older that you grafted yourself from a tiny little graft.
The one outside the window is 45 years old. The first tree I ever grafted. Yeah.
And you're like, I just like clipped a little piece off of the tree I wanted from the nursery, and came home and stuck it on a base tree, and then.
Well, it's a little more complicated than that. But yeah, it's kind of a surgical procedure on trees to get them to grow together.
And for people who don't know, explain grafting really quick.
Well,
the scriptures talk about it all the time, and
that we're grafted in. Yeah, grafting is taking the characteristic of a plant that you want and grafting it to a rootstock that is hardy. These Japanese maples are pretty hybrid. They're cultivars that are grown for their color, their shape, their texture, and all those things. But they don't have a strong root system. And so you take the original Japanese maples, the palmatums, and you graft the characteristic that you want onto the rootstock that will sustain it. And then you have a very vibrant, strong growing tree. So we're just replacing a weaker root system with a stronger root system so the tree can flourish.
So you basically get to have the root system of like a wild Acer palmatum Japanese maple.
Yeah, that's very hardy. Yeah.
It's very hardy and wild. And then on the top of that, you've taken something that the Japanese have in various ways like grown and split and changed the appearance of domestically. In some way, to the point where you have just this, just an insane variety of...
Well, there's, at this point, there's about 2,400 cultivated varieties of Japanese maple, name varieties. I only have about 150 of
just
varieties.
150.
But, well, I have the land to put them on, so that's why I'm here. It's not a city lot. But a lot of them are really close to each other, and so I just pick the one that I most admire and try to plant that and cultivate that.
When you graft it, you basically take the rootstock, this tree that's in the ground in a pot or whatever, that's thick and is wild, and then you take the leaf and the little bit of the branch from the, let's say, the lace leaf.
Right. There's inside the bark is a cambium layer, and that's the layer where the nutrients travel up and down the tree. And so as long as you can match those up, where the cutting that you're grafting in will receive its nourishment, it'll grow. And then you wrap it up and try to keep environmental things, bugs and oxygen out of it.
So you splice, so to speak.
Correct. Yeah.
A piece of the beautiful plant onto the more average plant that has the strong rootstock, and then you have a beautiful actual tree.
Right. Now, the seed from that tree will revert back to the parent plant. And so you can't take the seed from that tree and plant it. Then those are seedlings, and they will get mostly their parents' characteristics. So that's why all Japanese maples are kind of expensive. They're all grafted. It's like they're cloned off of the same tree. And so that takes a lot of work and a lot of nurture, and it just requires money to do it.
So you, as you did that, I came up here to your place and saw all these maples, and then found out that you grafted most of them on your own. And then started to learn more about the trees, and that set me on a journey of learning about trees, which I'd already done a lot of, but just became a real passion for a long time, and ended up, planting a lot of trees. And I remember the first few times, and the reason I bring this up is I remember looking at some of the trees and thinking, even before I met you, going to an orchard and looking at a tree and going, man, I would love to just look at that tree in my yard, day after day. Like, I get so much pleasure from it. And I look at this and then I would look at it going, well, it's going to take, if I plant that, it's going to take 15 years to look that way, or 30 years. And I remember thinking, I just can't wait that long. I just am not. When you're young like that,
it teaches you patience.
It's hard to imagine. Yeah. And then I remember, so I thought, forget it. I'll just buy one that's 10 years old already.
There you go.
And then you're that much closer to enjoying its size. And over time, though, I did splice and graft some of my own trees. And I did, Bryce and I, my brother-in-law, we did do some bonsais and different things and planted them in yards. And 10, 12 years later, I remember, looking back and seeing what we had planted and actually realizing how much time had passed and how big that tree had become.
Isn't that fulfilling?
And I realized, that 10 years isn't that long, actually.
No.
It seems so long. And it taught me really that life is a process and that it takes time to develop something of value, including myself. I can't become the person I want to be overnight. This is a lifelong journey, and then to enjoy the journey.
Right.
And I look back at some of these trees now that are 20, 25 years old that I planted, and I put that in the ground.
Yeah.
I did it. And I see what it's become, and I'm like, there's a lot of water under the bridge. There's a lot of time that's passed, but I realized that before you know it, you blink and
Don't your kids do that for you? You look
Yes.
at them and you see them becoming ladies.
Nothing's
And you
made me
think,
feel
how
older
did-
than my kids growing up.
How did that happen?
Kaylin went on her first date the other day,
Yeah.
and I'm like, what? How? A couple years, she's 18.
Yeah.
I can't. She's moving on. I'm not ready. I don't want her to be grown up yet. I don't want her to leave the house. I don't want any of them. And yet it's just happening.
Yeah.
It's such a quick moment. 18 years is nothing. It's nothing. And here it is. We're there almost. And
By the time the last one leaves, you're thinking, oh, it's quiet. I love this.
well, it's so interesting though. And I do feel like gardening in trees primarily you've influenced me in that regard. And I've always been drawn to nature and being around nature, but growing some things, being part of that growth, and especially a tree that is something that it's not perennial. It doesn't just.
But it's generational. It'll live longer than we are. It's something permanent. We have trees in this country that are 2,000 years old.
Mm-hmm.
That's mind-boggling. I think when you plant a tree, there's something subconscious about it outliving you. There's kind of a reverence towards it, I feel, anyway. It's going to be here after I'm gone. It's going to see the next generation of kids,
I agree. There are apple trees that my grandparents planted that we get to partake of because they put it in the ground.
Right.
Had they not planted it, I wouldn't be able to climb it and pick it.
Yeah, all of that.
And
sit under the shade of it.
There's something that does feel good about knowing I've put something in the ground that future generations I built something, so to speak, that future generations will then be able to take advantage of. Because I can't really now. There's not much to it. It's going to take some time.
Yeah, it doesn't benefit you. I think you learn something about time and generations when you plant a tree. If you think about it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Well, before we wrap up, because we probably should, there's a lot of things to do, but I want you to maybe share, what's a message you have for people that are listening?
I think we've touched on it all along. Grow and learn and respect yourself. Get a bigger tool bag because life will become easier. You gain more understanding with each tool you put in the bag. Read and learn. There's so much to learn in this world. There's so much to learn in life. And it just makes life so much easier when you have more tools to deal. Because basically life is moving from one set of problems to another. I mean, none of us have a cushy life. We're broken people in a broken world. Any expectation above that sets us up for defeat. And so the more tools that you have, relationally, financially, spiritually, the more equipped you are, the easier life comes.
Yeah, your toolbox is ridiculous because, I look around and I see your art on the wall. I see sculptures you've created, lamps. I see the cars that you've designed, the engines and the hot from start to finish, the building of a car, the lines that you see and want to have put into the body of an old car, and to the garden and the trees and the sculpting, the woodwork, your whole life, your everything around you is an outpouring of your creativity, your learning in your toolbox. And there's very few things as far as building or whatever, I can come to you and say, how do you do this? And I get an answer. And it's the same with relationships, life, religion, philosophy. It doesn't matter. Like, there is a wealth of information that you carry with you in all aspects, and from finance and wealth to, like I said, to meaning. It's all there. And honestly, for me, that's why I began reading as much as I started reading.
Well, I see that same stuff in you. I mean, you're take on the challenge, be a conqueror. I can move on. That blesses me to see that come to fruit in yourself too. You came to me in a really vulnerable place that I was, and you ministered to me through just the being that you were. And I appreciate that so much. That meant a lot to me at that time, and it still does. I see you as an extension of my own family. So I wish you the best.
Dave Ramsey says, you're the same person you are today as you are 20 years from now, 50 years from now, except for the people you meet and the books you read.
Right.
And I wonder, I hope I've sent a lot of people through what I do into a path of reading and learning. But I could easily see myself at this point in my life having read just 5 books, instead of hundreds.
Right.
And what would I be like if I hadn't embraced learning and growing like that?
You'd have a tool bag with a hammer in it.
Exactly.
Complaining that the whole world is unfair to you.
Exactly. Well, Arnie, thank you. Appreciate you coming on the podcast and
bless you.
Sharing.
It's been fun.
Yourself with us means a lot to me, and I love you.
Oh, right back at you. This is one of those relationships in my life that has just been a huge blessing. You and Suzanne, I just wish you the best. Well, I don't get to see you that often.
Yeah, leaving Oregon City, one of the hardest parts was leaving, relationships like yours behind. Yeah. Not being able to have the association on a weekly, daily basis, where we get to sit down and have these kind of moments. That's hard,
Or build something together.
Yes.
Yeah. So
I'm grateful to you.
Thank you.
Folks, thanks for tuning in to the podcast. And if you got any questions for me, you got any questions for Arnie, leave us a comment. Appreciate you tuning in. And as always, stay gritty, friends.